All right, so thanks for attending. Yeah, another data webinar. This one focusing on the corn data from 2024. Again, the idea here is that we want to talk through the data that we saw in the OVT to give you all a head start on making corn selections, corn hybrid selections, either for yourself or for helping your growers make corn hybrid selections in the next month or so. I am recording this, so I'm going to post it to YouTube. It won't be today, but sometime this week, and I'll get that distributed out so y'all can get it out to your growers, anybody else that might be interested. That way, if they have time later, they can take a quick look at it, or if they're bored and want to fall asleep, they can listen to it. So what we're going to go through is what we do all the time. Go through kind of a summary of what the season looked like. Um, Kind of what our yields look like, what our trends were across the different regions across the state, and then we'll deep dive into the data itself and the variety selection tool and go through how I would make selections if I was a grower trying to look for either established hybrids, hybrids that are performing well by environment, or newer hybrids that we have out there. So to start with, let's look at, and one powerful thing we can do now we have a database, so we can look at yield over year for the corn OVT. And as you can see, despite having the drop pressure that we had this year, we actually came in just below our yields from 2023, which were second highest for us across the last 7 years. Actually, this is 8 years. So we actually did pretty good. Now, what this isn't saying is what locations we had to drop because of either yield variability or low yield levels, which we'll get to here in a minute. But for those locations that we were able to report, we came in, third highest yields over the last 8 years. So for those locations, we actually had some fairly good yielding corn hybrids. One thing I also like to do is look at maturity and kind of what the response of maturity was to our yields this past year. What you're seeing here on the left is yield level from 175 to 215, and on the bottom, relative maturity for the corn. So from a 109-day hybrid all the way out to a 120. There's really not a big, huge difference from a 109 to 117 this year. Where we did see a difference was when you got into that 119, 120, those very late season hybrids. Now, I will caveat this by we didn't have a whole lot of entries in that 119 to 120 range. Majority of our entries are from 113 to 116. So, there is a little skew there based off the fact that we don't have as many entries there. But for those that were where we did have entries, we did see a little bit higher yielding situations with those later full maturity hybrids. That kind of makes sense based off the fact that we had drought pressure in late May and early June. Those late hybrids, depending on what their planting date looked like, could escape the majority of that drought pressure, pollinate after that drought pressure had eased just a little bit, and that's maybe why we had a little bit higher yield. Now, we're not talking a tremendous amount. You're only talking about 10 bushels-ish between a 117 to a 119 or 120, but there was a little bit of a trend there, probably based off of what we saw for maturity. I mentioned before that while we had the third highest yielding yield level overall, that didn't account for drop locations, and that's what we're talking about here with this screen. So we had actually 11 locations. We had a location in Edgecombe County at the Upper Coastal Plains Research Station this past year. Of those 11 locations, 2 were irrigated. We had 4 locations in the Piedmont. That gave us 4 locations in the coastal plain and 3 locations in the Tidewater. I may eventually add another Tidewater location, get an even split. For right now, we're looking at 11, 4 in Piedmont, 4 in coastal plain, 3 in Tidewater. We look at the overall yields below. Overall, Piedmont and coastal plain were very similar, 160.5 in the Piedmont to 162 in the coastal plain. The difference was we lost a lot of locations in the Piedmont due to either low yield. So Granville was averaging 30 bushel, which we couldn't report. Yadkin averaged 5 bushel, which we couldn't report. Union had some good yields in there, but were very variable, and I'll talk about what that looks like here in a minute. But so much variability there that we just couldn't get good separation of hybrids, plus the yield level being a little bit low. So where you see an NR there means we didn't report, and I've tried to put a reason why we didn't report that data in parentheses there. The only Piedmont location we were able to report this year was Rowan, and that's only because it was irrigated. I don't have the heat map in this presentation. I'll probably share it later. But I could tell where the irrigation gun reached and where it didn't reach based off the yield levels that we saw within that field. So irrigation, particularly in the Piedmont, was of vital importance. If you move to the coastal plain, we actually did get some good yield levels across Bertie, Robinson, and Sampson. Bertie, by far, our highest yielding coastal plain location. It did not have irrigation. The only irrigated location we had in the coastal plain was at Edgecombe. but we weren't able to report that due to variable yields. And I will show you that heat map here in a minute and kind of walk through my thought process when I'm looking at reporting these yield levels. But overall, consistent with what I would expect in a very dry year, lower yield levels in Robinson and Sampson, but still good separation of hybrids at those locations. Bertie, very high yield levels, not irrigated, got good timely rainfall just about all year long. In fact, the grower told me that he was irrigating all around that field, but didn't have to irrigate at that location. So some good data from those three sites. And then you move to the Tidewater, far and away our highest yielding region this past year at 235.7. None irrigated. This is all dry land, but anywhere from 229 to 240 yield level. So if you're looking for high yielding corn hybrid data, the Tidewater is going to be your area to look at. Now, caveat that with it might be a different environment than what you're looking at if you've got a sandy soil location or you're on a clay. But those real high yielding locations are going to be in that Tidewater region this year. This is also a good reason why I look at percent of trial mean, right? So we talk about looking at raw yield levels. If I'm a grower in the Piedmont trying to make a selection based off of this year's data, and I'm just looking at raw yield levels, where are all of my hybrid values coming from? Where are all my hybrids skewing towards? They're skewing towards the Tidewater, right? Because that's where your highest yields are. So you're making a selection. If you're making a selection based off of raw yield in either the Piedmont or Coastal Plain, there's a heavy influence of that raw yield towards what the Tidewater looks like, unless you're just looking at your region only, okay? If you're looking across statewide, there's a skew towards Tidewater, and that's why I like looking at percent trial mean, because it standardizes everything across regions, and we lose a lot of that skew based off of if one region does better than another. And we talked about, we talked on the first slide about the yield level by year. Looking back, I'll go back to this first slide real quick. If we're making a yield level over multiple years, obviously 2022 is one of our lower yielding levels in the last 3 years, right? So we're trying to make a yield selection based off of raw yield. That data is being skewed towards that data in 2022. If we did a percent trial mean, which is what I like doing, it standardizes that across years, it standardizes it across regions, and it gives us equal footing when we're talking about how hybrids have performed, okay? So that's what this past year looked like for us. We had 11 locations. We were very close to reporting Edgecombe, and I'll show you that location here in a minute. Just the razor's edge we were on, being able to report some versus others. The Piedmont was very tough this year. Those clays held that water a lot more tightly. I did not release it when it got dry, and that meant that the corn did not have any water to pull from when it really needed it come pollination time. And that's why we lost a lot of locations in the Piedmont based off of low yield or variable yield levels in those locations. Okay. Now, what's the what's the razor's edge I'm talking about? Well, this is a heat map from our Edgecombe site. You may or may not be able to read this. That doesn't matter if you can. Green is roughly 170 to 200 bushel yields. Red or brown is your lowest, is 20 to 40. Okay. This field was irrigated. This is one of our irrigated locations. And you can see on the left-hand side, they ran a gun. On the left, they ran a gun on the right. Now, they reached the middles. There's absolutely no issue reaching the middle. The reason that you see this big hole here in the middle is because of a soil type change. This field, when we planted it, had an obvious clay pocket right in the middle of the sandy loam soil. And that clay pocket held water on the entire year and did not release it. And that's where we really suffered for yield levels. So my two trials are represented here on the bottom. The green trial is our medium corn test. The blue trial is our late corn test. When you have a hole like this in the middle of really good yielding corn around it, I can't get enough reps of a single hybrid in order to report that data. We do 4 reps, but the idea is if we have to drop a rep, we have one that we can drop and still have 3 good reps to drop. We did not have even 1 good rep of data for a lot of these hybrids based off this hole here. And that's why we had to drop that location. This is a very obvious example. At Union, that's a little bit more nuanced because you don't see necessarily that one hole. You see a lot more of a variability of yields across the location. But this is what happens when we get into a very long, hot drought in our corn tests. If we have anything like a soil type change that's in the middle of the field, it really is pronounced when we look at that final yield data. Okay. So that's why we couldn't report Edgecombe. It's unfortunate because it was a really good yielding location. I struggled with this one because we were so close to being able to report it and just not enough good data there to pull it forward. But that's the kind of QA/QC steps we go through. It's not just pull data off of a combine. It's look at these heat maps, look at the trends of the heat map, that we see? Do we have anything that might be a combine issue? Do we have anything that might be a field effect? If we do have those things, can we drop a rip in order to get rid of that combine or field effect? And if we can't, then we just have to go ahead and drop that location, because it's better to not have released bad data than, release bad data and have a kind of a skew towards how growers are trying to make hybrid selections. I mean, you have one here. I just realized 3 bushel yield. There was no corn in this one plot. And it's not because it missed water. This entire range had access to water. It's just because of that clay pocket. So that's how close we were. Very, very frustrating with the amount of work that goes into these tests, but at the end of the day, better to drop it than to move forward with it. Any questions on the data itself or the year that we have?
Ryan, just a question on that. It's not particular about that, but would you have the same effect if you'd had a very wet year? Would you still seen those pockets in those because of the soil type?
I think you probably would have. It probably would have been reversed a little bit. So like you may have seen, well, actually it probably would have been the same because the clays would have held that water a little bit longer. But I think you would have still seen that effect of an extremely wet year. Typically in those extremes, those field effects are really more pronounced than when we have kind of an average year, right? Where we don't have an excess of rainfall or a deficit of rainfall. We have an average year, though you don't see those effects as much. I probably would have still seen it, even in an average year, but it wouldn't have been a difference of 3 bushel to 204 bushel. It might have been a difference of 10 to 20 bushel, which is more doable.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep. In general, this is why we do, like when we're making site selections, I go to Web Soil Survey. This actually didn't show up on Web Soil Survey when I went and looked at it. It was only when we were starting to plant, and you could tell the soil type change based off the tillage that had happened prior to us. And at that point, half the plot's in the field, so you can't really just pull out and start all over again. So I was hopeful that we could get through it, but that's why we go through such a strenuous look at the Web Soil Survey map, make sure that the yield map from before, if we have one, is available, we can look at, make sure we don't have these kind of drastic field effects. Okay, so let's go through the data itself. I want to do a quick reminder, assuming this is showing. Yeah. Quick reminder of how we're distributing data currently, and this is going to be my model moving forward until probably for a while, until somebody wants something different. 2 sources that you can get OVT data from. You can go to our OVT website, ncovt.com. You can, if you're looking at corn, you can click on corn. We have it separated by year, going all the way back to 2013. This whole extension interface is getting changed here soon. They're redesigning the extension portals, so this may look a little different in a couple of months, but we will make sure that we at least have 5 years worth of data still to pull from. So this may not go all the way back to 2013. It might go all the way back to 2020, but we will still have at least 5 years worth of data here, even after that change. So I want to look at corn data. I can click on 2024. I have a lot of access to reports at this view. So what you see up here, it says reports from variety selection tool. These are all reports I pull out of the variety selection tool itself. So I put data into the tool. I use the database to look at different queries, and I pull those queries out into reports and post those PDFs here. So if you want something quick and dirty about what looked good in the coastal plain or tidewater over multiple years, you can pull that here. These are all based off a percent trial mean, because again, that's what I think our better way of looking at these are. If you're instead just want to look at what happened this last year, those are also posted here, those tables. Now, these are just analyzed tables outside of the variety selection tool. So like the normal tables that you're used to from a couple of years ago, those are posted here. I want to mention where you see like medium corn data tables, late corn data tables, I also put all my Excel files on here. So if you don't want to look at a PDF, you want something that you can sort or add or move around or do things with, that's also available. So you have PDF tables, you have Excel data tables that you can look at. I have my location summary tables here. So like medium from this past year, we can look at how things performed across all of our different environments in a quick look, how they did statewide. We can look at where they were in the percent trial mean. Again, this is just for 2024, but this gives you a quick and dirty, like Axis did well, just about every location this past year was one of our highest yielding and medium statewide, and then some of the agronomic characteristics that went with it, okay? So you, as a consumer of data, have a lot of good options that you can choose from. If you want something quick to give you kind of a head start, I would honestly go here first to the OVT website and use some of these reports and say, hey, what did Ryan pull out? I don't have time to go in the variety selection tool. I just want something quick and dirty that tells me what I should be looking at. This gives me a head start. This is where I would go. Okay, so that's your first avenue of data delivery. The second, of course, is the variety selection tool itself. And I'm while I'll continue supporting this because I want everybody to have multiple avenues of access to this data, my belief is that the variety selection tool is your best avenue to look at the deep dive, the details of the data itself. It's one thing for Ryan to say, this is what I pulled out of the variety selection tool based off of my views or what I'm looking at. It's a completely different thing if a grower has different priorities or if they have different considerations. They want to look at specific relative maturities. They want to look at specific traits. They want to look at a specific environmental look. Like that's a better opportunity for them in that variety selection tool. So we have the OVT website as a quick and dirty. The variety selection tool is, of course, our bread and butter. I'm going to try to get to it now. Let's see if it's sharing. I'll have Zoom. Yep. Okay. So this is where I go for all of my data looks when I'm talking about OVT data because it's got everything. We're showing anywhere from 3,000 records, a little bit over 3,000 records in wheat, all the way to 13,000 records in soybeans. And this will be close to 15,000 records if we report all 17 locations in soybeans this year. So we have a lot of data that we can pull from. Looking at corn, I always go to OVT data as my start. Don't worry about maturity, though you have that ability to split that immediately if you want to. And again, we're going to look at percent of trial mean first. Now, I think I've talked to this group a bunch about where I like starting, but where we start looking at hybrids for hybrid selection, what do we first want to look at? I'm making this a class, so there's a call and response. Single year data or multiple year data first? You can type in chat if you want to talk. Everybody's ignoring me. We want to look at multiple year data first, okay? So I'm looking at percent of trial mean, which all I did was I click over here, percent trial mean, and reload it. This gives me everything. Obviously, my multi-year data is over here where it says 22, 24 averages. This is all my multi-year data. I have Y3 and Y1. Obviously, Y1s are just single year. I only have 1 year data off of that. I want anything Y2 and Y3, so we can filter all those Y1s out by telling it we want number of years. If I can type years in right, to be greater than 1. I want 2s and I want 3s. I don't want any 1s, so we just say greater than 1. Filter it, and that's going to give us all of our 2s and 3s. Obviously, that reduces it a bunch because we had, I want to say we had right at half the number of entries were in the test the last year, prior year, or also the year before that. So either 2 or 3 year data. If you don't like all this space, you can get rid of this by clicking on setup up here. It just takes your whole thing away. And now you've got all the space in the world to look at this. Obviously, we want to look, if we're looking at multiple year data, remember we can look at regionality. We don't have to just look at statewide. We can look at how regions did. Because you can see there are some down here. We want 3% or higher if we're talking about percent trial mean. Here's I think this is an Integra line. I'm almost certain it is. Let's find out. Yes, it's an Integra line. So there's an Integra hybrid, 6624. It's 5% of trial mean for the Piedmont, right? That'd be actually a pretty good selection for the Piedmont, but it's below average if you're talking about just looking at statewide. This might be a good option. Here's a 10%. That's actually really good. DCAB 6606. 10% for the percent trial mean over 2 years for the Piedmont. Again, below average if you look at statewide. So if you don't look at regions, you're missing out on some of these high flyers that kind of fall down below average if you're just looking at statewide. So I like looking at regionality if we're talking about multiple year data because you have enough data there to pull from that you feel confident about how the hybrid's performing. Now, for those in the Piedmont this year, I'm being very clear. We're reporting one location in the Piedmont in 2024, and that's an irrigated location. So it is my opinion that you need to be pulling all of your choices from multiple year selections for this year. You don't have enough data. You only have one location that's irrigated if you're trying to look at something just for the Piedmont. I don't know it's going to be a good true look for those, particularly in dry land situations in the Piedmont. My preference would be to pull from multiple year data, and then next year we'll hopefully have some better results, more locations to pull from for single year data. But regardless, we're going to start multiple year. You can click on Piedmont. We can sort it. We look and see, top 5, top 10. We have some a decab, 2 decab hybrids and Integra, C consultants. I believe that's a gateway. Find out here in a minute. It is a gateway. So I have good options here. 6835, you're going to hear this hybrid a lot. It's still performing well. It's performed well over the last 2 years. It's still showing up fairly well for us in our tests. Again, we can click and select top 5, top 10. I'll do top 10. For the Piedmont, we could select all the way down. My floor is usually that 2 to 3% range, so we could select all the way down to this FS hybrid if we wanted to. But you have a lot of good options here. We can pull that to compare. Again, this gives us all of our data. It's going to show it for statewide. We'd have to filter it down. What is it doing? What are you doing? Trial box all enabled. Okay. Well, if this was working, it would show the compared data for these hybrids. That's why it's correlated and selected. Okay. There we go. So we pulled the top 10 in. You can look at trait, you can look at company, you can look at yield. Again, this yield is over all locations, not just the Piedmont. If you wanted to just look at the Piedmont, you'd have to filter back. You have to take out the coastal plain and tidewater regions just to look at the Piedmont response. But in any case, it gives you an option to look at all these different hybrids compared to each other. The relative maturity, again, is that medium to late side. There's a couple mediums, there's a couple late, so there wasn't a huge skew there. The yield level, the times it was in that top yield group, test weight, year height, stalk height. So a lot of good options here to look across all the different hybrids for the Piedmont. Again, if you're a Piedmont grower, I would start with and probably finish with multiple year selections this year, just based off the fact you'd only have one location to pull from a single year. Okay. So that's what we're looking at for Piedmont for multiple year. We can do the same thing for coastal plain. Just click it twice. Now it's sorting multiple year worth of percent trial mean from top to bottom. Hey, look, DKC 6835 is again at the top. It does have a very good performance on coastal plain and Piedmont soils. We've seen that. The time it starts falling off, and when I say falling off, it's still a high yielding hybrid. It doesn't go anywhere. And those silt loam high organic soils, it's not as racehorsey as some of the other hybrids, but it's still performing well above average. So it's a really good hybrid across, but it does definitely have a skew in coastal plain and Piedmont environments. You're seeing a couple of DKC lines, 11383, 6422. Again, that gateway line, 1913 Tricepta, an FS line 6306, which showed up well this last year. I think 6439. Is that Integra? It is. 6439 Integra, Seedway, Progeny, Revere. Again, we can do what we did with the Piedmont. We can click on the ones that we're interested in, pull those into a compare view, and then you can actually print out that compare view, which I know you all have done before. But some of the ones that we're used to, some of the newer ones, 11383 actually showed up fairly well this year, and I'll show that in the just a single 2024 data. But some good options across the board, across multiple companies. Again, there's a lot of good high yielding hybrids up here. The benefit of doing it this way is, like we talked about before, is like pulling out that 6606, which does really, really well in the Piedmont, but may not do as well in the coastal plain and tidewater. It's pulling out those high flyers. If we did statewide and we're looking at coastal plain, here's a Dynagrow line 57 TC29. It's doing well in the coastal plain environment. It's above 3%, so it's doing really well. It's just below average as far as a statewide. So that's a hybrid that you would miss if you're just looking at this statewide data. Okay. And then finally, if we did tidewater only, this FS line did really, really well in the tidewater. Again, we've got 3 years of data on it, so it's done well over multiple years, not just this last year, but this last year definitely it showed out in the tidewater region. You have Revere 1839, again 6835 from Decab, Progeny 2314, Dynagrow 58 TC94, the Integra 6493, FS 6017, and then a couple more decab and FS lines here. So good options. This is what I'm talking about, the power of the variety selection tool. We can focus in on the regions that these hybrids are performing well in. So we can pull out those specific hybrids that did well for those specific regions. So we can start fitting hybrids to the environments that they're really performing well in. Okay. Any questions on the multi-year pulls? Anything that you want me to take to compare that you want to look closer at? Any surprises to this data? Okay. So that's where we want to start. I want our majority of our acreage planted in these multi-year selections because we have enough data to say that we feel fairly confident that they're going to perform well in those environments. Okay. Multiple year data has to be our starting point. It needs to be the majority of our acreage because that's where our best data lies. That can't be the end point. We need to be trying newer hybrids that are out there. So now we want to flip the switch script something and look just at the 2024 data. Okay. So I'm going to take out this filter because I want to bring in my 1 year hybrids now. I'm just going to eliminate that filter, let it reprocess. I don't need the filter anymore. And then we can start looking at the 2024 averages. So we had been looking at this 2022-24. Now we're just going to look at 2024. Here, we absolutely cannot just look at regions. Regions are a support for our making selections. They're not the place we go to first. They're just the place that we support from. And I'll show what that looks like here in a minute. Again, particularly in the Piedmont, because how many locations do you have in the Piedmont this year? Only one. That's an irrigated location, which not everybody's going to be irrigated. So we're going to look at 2024, but we're going to look at statewide. And we're going to look at statewide high to low. You know, my cutoff again is at 2 to 3%. So you're in this range. So if we look down the road, the 64H20 is the axis line, AXIS, Progeny 2314, this Gateway 1913. MA is Mid-Atlantic Seeds. They came back into the test this year for the first time. They had been in test back in, I'll say 2018. They've come back into the test here this last year. This is a Dynagrow line, 60 TC45. It's on the later side, but it did really, really well. You know, it's 7.6% of trial mean in the statewide. But again, one location, the Piedmont, is top of the yield group. Tidewater, it did really, really well. It showed out well in the Tidewater here. If you look at this access line, you know, those of you in the coastal plain, this was one that did really, really well. That's across 3 locations, and they're in varying locations. So that's from a lower yielding environment like we saw in Robinson, where you're about 120, all the way out to that 210 bushel environment in Bertie. And you can see that. So I've got a 15.5% trial mean in the coastal plain, but pull it over here. Robinson was a lower yielding environment, still above 15%. Sampson was a little bit higher yielding, but still on the low side compared to Robinson, compared to Bertie, above 18%. Even at Bertie, where it was supported with rainfall, it did 12%. So feel pretty good about how this hybrid performed in those coastal plain environments, and that's showing not only in our coastal plain average, but across the locations we looked at. This progeny line did well just about across any region this last year. Didn't really have a weak spot in any location. Maybe Beaufort on a little bit, but you're still in that 2 to 3% range. Gateway line, same story. No real holes there. This Mid-Atlantic seed line, probably not as strong in the Tidewater region, but definitely strong in the coastal plain region. Did perform well, 20% in the Robinson. So towards the top in that location, again, that's a lower yielding drought stress location. Same story for Sampson, a little bit on the lower side for Bertie. So this tells me that maybe, possibly, and I don't know this for sure because it's one single year data, but possibly in lower yielding or more stressed environments, this 8110 tray may do better than when it's in a more supported, you know, higher yielding environment. It might be more of a defensive hybrid than a racehorse hybrid. Again, that's off of 1 year data, so we'd have to look at that hybrid again to confirm that. This Dynagrow line, the 60 TC, top Piedmont, top Tidewater. The only place it kind of fell off a little bit, not much, but a little bit was in coastal plain. And that was mostly at a Sampson location. So we can maybe account this to variability. You know, it could be that it was just in a bad spot in that Sampson location, which caused it to be a little bit lower, but overall, you know, fairly strong across environments. Same for this. I think that's another gateway line. Yep, 3919 tray. decab 11383, which we found in the 2-year data. So you notice that we had 2 of these 2-year lines, this progeny, this 1913 with our 2-year, but we've actually talked about 1, 2, 3, 4 lines that were just 1-year looks. Okay. So we're back to this 2 and 3-year data. These last 3 you would have pulled out of a 3-year look based off the regions you're looking at. Here's another 1-year, this FS line. Did well in Piedmont, did really good in the coastal plain, probably a little bit off in the Tidewater, but again, you're right at average, so it's not bad, but definitely has a coastal plain skew to it here. Its only poorest location was the Beaufort. Pasquotank actually did fairly well. Beaufort's organic. Pamlico was an organic. Pasquotank was actually a silt loam, so maybe there's a soil type interaction there, but really, really good on sands here within all 3 of our coastal plain environments. And another mid-Atlantic line, again, really strong. That's one location in Piedmont. That's what I'm saying. Don't use this for selections, but overall fairly strong. 6835, again, one location in Piedmont. I would take that with a grain of salt because of its performance across multiple years. You can see that right here. It's 15% in the Piedmont across 3 years. So I think this is just an anomaly, but overall fairly strong. So that's what I would do if I'm looking at single year data is I'm going down this statewide. I'm sorting it statewide from high to low. I'm looking across my regions and I'm like, oh, highest in the coastal plain. Did that mean it was high in all 3 locations? And in this case, it was, highest in Sampson, but overall fairly good yielding in all 3 locations. And that's why I lead off this webinar with what our yield levels looked like across all of our regions, because you need to start associating, okay, Robinson and Sampson for the OVT were either typical or low yielding, depending on your point of view, based off the drought that we had this year, where Bertie was probably one of the higher yielding locations that we've had in that site for a while. It may be like it was supported because it had timely rainfall, where Sampson and Robinson weren't necessarily reported, or supported. So how did these hybrids perform based off of those yield levels? And that's why I lead with the yield level piece, because that then informs us of how it would perform in these different environments and in these different situations. So that's where I'm going to stop. Does anybody have any questions, or does anybody want me to look at something more specific than just the percent trial mean across regions? Because we can absolutely deep dive this a lot more than we are. I stop at this level because for a lot of folks, this is kind of where they want to be. There's opportunities to look at traits. There's opportunities to look at specific soil information to see if there's actual even more association there. But typically, this is enough for everybody, for a majority of people when they're wanting to look at these hybrid selections. Anybody have any questions at all? Rod, I see you thinking. I'm gonna call you up.
Yeah, well, I am thinking, but it's Monday morning. What I was just thinking, Ryan, I was thinking to call you and tell you. Otherwise, I love this, and but it just seems like Monday morning. There's so much going on that it's hard to really think about. Okay, I'll come back to it and probably have 1,000 questions, but it's tough on a Monday morning to focus, but so much trying to catch up. But it's good stuff. It really is. Love it.
So again, I'm going to make this available on YouTube. I'll send out the link to it. If you have things that you weren't sure about what I was doing within the tool, that's, hit me up, ask me. I'm happy to help. I would ask that you forward this recording to your growers, to any interested parties, so they can start using that tool to make selections for themselves. Early ordering timelines are coming up quick for corn. I don't know when, but they have to be either mid-month or later this month, my best guess. But yeah, I hope this is kind of giving y'all an idea of what the corn data looked like for us this year, and kind of what I would do if I'm looking at this data within the variety selection tool to make choices. I see Della and Billy are on. Do y'all have any questions?
I'm like Rod. I enjoyed it this morning. One thing I was curious about, I know you aware of Edward is working with I think we've got 8 or 9 counties participating with a variety trial, and how we can overlay that. I mean, there's probably a few of those that would be the same varieties, but not the majority of them.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Billy. And one thing I think we can get to that point. I'm going to see if that's in here yet. So we are currently linked with Auburn University, Clemson University, and we're soon to be linked with Virginia soybean producers specifically. In that the data that they have in their database will be linked to ours and can be viewed in this exact same view at the same time. Okay. I'm saying
Okay.
that because within that data, and I'm trying to see if it's in corn, it may not be in corn, it may just be in wheat. Within that data, so excuse me for a minute, I'm going to swap to wheat real quick. They also report strip trials. So let me see if I can get to, maybe because it was percent trial, I mean, it wasn't showing. I'm pulling in wheat data. Obviously, this is not a wheat data webinar, but they have linked up within us on wheat. And now that I say all this, it's not going to pull. Yeah. So if it will pull. So you can see I have Auburn and I have Clemson that I can select from. And within Auburn and Clemson, Virginia is not connected just yet. But with Auburn and Clemson, they have both like these are their OVT tests for Clemson, but these are also their challenge tests. So they're more strip trolley tests. So if and when that data was pulling in, which it's not doing right now, you would see that information all in the same view. And we can do what we were doing before. I'm now going to completely break this thing. We can look at all of the different data all at once. Yeah, it's just not pulling in. That's my goal for the strip trial data is I want it to get in, if it was ever going to pull in, I'd want it to get into this situation where we can look at it's its own group, but it's a group that we can pull into the same view that we're looking at OVT data, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's it's not, it happens every time that I'm doing a webinar. I can look at this data 80 different ways and nothing goes wrong. And the minute I put it in front of people, that's when it breaks. But in any case, imagine that this has Clemson and everybody else associated with it. That's how the strip trial data would look. Right now, it's in, I'm in wheat. Let me get to corn. Right now, it's the data that we've had from strip trials is in here. And it's funny because it's actually showing, this is not even our data. This is, what is this? Marshall County. Yeah, it's another state. I don't know which state, but it's already showing that as through that linkage. So right now we've been showing those reports over here on the right-hand side, and they'll kind of click through as we go. My goal is to kind of pull that into that overall OVT data view moving forward. So.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan, you were talking about, growers getting seed orders in soon.
Yeah.
And where we've been doing the district, corn working groups.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the same is going to apply for us. We need to start looking at varieties that we're
Yes.
interested in having for next year. And
We need to start putting together a list of hybrids that y'all would like to test next year. And then we need to have a bigger discussion about how we want to approach that testing.
okay, are you gonna set up a Zoom meeting for everybody? Or how do you want to handle it? Or by district or?
I haven't really thought about it, to be honest with you, because I've been in soybean harvest wheat planting land.
Oh yeah.
Probably start with the Southeast group. And I'll send it to everybody on the agronomic program team list. So if other districts want to be involved in that situation, not that I'm necessarily looking to source seed for everybody, but that maybe we can start talking about more statewide ways of doing that testing so that we can
Right.
get it to a place that it can go into this tool a lot easier. Because right now, that data looks different from Chrome than it does from Southeast, than it does from Rod's group, than it does from Andrew's group, so where we can get some more cohesion there might make sense. So I might put something bigger together, or potentially we can have a conversation at the agronomic program team meeting on the 6th to kind of set a stage for a Zoom meeting if we wanted to. So
Gotcha. Okay.
Ryan, if that's the case on the 6th, just remind me because I guess I'll be emceeing that.
okay.
that day. So just remind me of that if I forget it.
Yeah, I might try to set. Now it's pointing. I might try to set something up. Here we go. Are you gonna pull in, please? I might try to set something up before that, but to be honest with you, a lot of it depends on how field work goes on my side, and I'm kind of in the swamp right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'll remind you if we get to that point, but I'll try to put some thought to that and figure that out. Thank you for bringing that up, Della, because I completely forgot about it. Did it take my trial box out again? Yeah. So select all, select all. Let's see if I can pull in other states' data so I can show you what this is supposed to look like. Or if it's just going to rotate on me forever. Here we go. So there it is. This is what I was trying to tell you. So obviously, not everybody's got the same hybrid in there, right? Like this FS line is in this OVT in Clemson. It's not, they actually have on-farm data in Alabama, so not reporting that. They have OVT regions. This is Alabama, so it's north, central, south is Alabama. But this Dynagrow line is showing up across all, so that we can start using this as a way of selecting across multiple regions, because it will average. It'll average here. So this is OVT here. This is Clemson here. This is Alabama here. We're still getting averages there. And it's going to average across all different ones for multiple years. So we can start. This is what I was talking about. My viewpoint is where it says on farm here would be on farm North Carolina. Would be agent testing North Carolina. And that would split out by county. And it would look a little bit like this. Look a little bit like this on farm where it says like Geneva and Perry. Instead, it would show on farm Southeast region, on farm Chrome, on farm, Tidewater region, or whatever your region's called, Rob. So
Yeah, well, whatever. So unless I'm missing something, just looking at that, the way it's listed, the OVT from other counties or from other states, or the data from other states, is there a way for it to say the state that it's from?
it's showing if you right now it's not in the header, but if you scroll over, actually, if you just pull back your setup, it shows it here.
Right.
So
Okay.
you look crop blocks at the top here, and you can tell it whether you want Auburn, whether you want Clemson, and deselecting those takes away those locations. I know from this data that this is Auburn, all that's Auburn, and then the bottom here is all Clemson.
Okay.
So my viewpoint here is that y'all would come in as North Carolina agent, on-farm agent testing, and then it'd be split out either by county or split out by region, or however y'all would like that to look. But I think we can pull that in to give growers the opportunity to look at that data in the same view that they're looking at OVT data. The cool thing there is that you could take out the Auburn and the Clemson stuff if you want to, but then you're doing averages across OVT and on-farm testing that then gets reported on the back end, right? It gets averaged all the way over to this side here. And then we can start making selections based on how it did in, let's say this was all the on-farm for North Carolina plus the OVT, how it did in all of y'all's agent testing, and also how it did in the OVT to make those selections from large scale to small scale. Does that make sense, Billy?
Yeah. So in our case, if we report it as a region, or you could also report it as a multiple counties, they gave you those averages.
Yep. Okay. I would, and I got to think about this. I'm absolutely not giving a final answer right now because I have not thought about it.
Sure.
If I'm wanting to talk about, like ideally, I would want to divide y'all into regions based off of like Tidewater or Coastal Plain Piedmont, right? Like Chrome's going to mostly be a Coastal Plain agent region. Southeast agents are mostly going to be a Coastal Plain agent region, minus a couple counties. And we may have to swap those counties into a Tidewater region. But I want to keep this nomenclature the same. Have y'all as your Chrome or Southeast region, or whatever you want to call yourselves here, but have it with this in mind, have it linked to a Piedmont region or linked to a coastal plain, so that we are still thinking about specific environments that we're testing in. Like for Della's region, you know, Onslow is going to be pretty much a coastal plain. Craven may be closer to a tidewater. We'd have to make a call based off the soil types that we're testing there. But that's probably like how I'd want to split that. But we'd still report either individual counties or as a region. We'd report it in there.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. Like I said, I appreciate y'all coming this morning. Sorry for the last minute reminder. I meant to send something out Friday, and then I got sidetracked with a whole bunch of other stuff. So thanks for coming aboard. If you have any questions, you know, shoot them to me, holler at me, call me. Again, I'll get this recording put together hopefully in the next couple of days and get it sent out so you can share it with your growers and anybody else that might be interested.
Be good. Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Appreciate it,
Thanks.
Ryan.